Hello! So recently on this channel we've been talking about how to rig up the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and its rather odd form factor. Well, soon I have a shoot coming up where I need to rock an Easyrig, which means I need to have a top handle on. And with a few of you already asking what my setup is, I figured today we would be going over what my 6K Pro rig currently looks like and where I hope to take it in the future. So let's go ahead and jump in. Now, right off the bat, you might be already noticing that I'm not using one of the cages from one of the three manufacturers, Smallrig, Tilta, or Condor Blue, that currently has a custom cage out. And that's for a few reasons. The first reasons are I have a shoot soon, and all of these cages currently are either not out or shipping in over a month. So already kind of closes off my options a bit for this shoot. The second reason being that the Smallrig cage, which is probably the cage I could get the fastest, has a T5 drive slot, where it actually ends up pushing the rods, which you would mount underneath the cage, too far down so that I wouldn't be able to mount my rod-mounted Mattebox. So unfortunately, that cage doesn't necessarily work for me, but it might work for you, so check it out if you're interested. Now, next, let's take a look at the rig build. But before we do, if you find the information in this video helpful and have the time, a like would be very much appreciated. Also, if you want to see more, a subscription is also very much appreciated. It helps me out a ton, and if not, that dislike button works extra well if you hit it twice. One of the things I didn't necessarily realize in some of the earlier videos was there is now a greater distance between the bottom of the lens and the bottom of the camera. Now, this change actually leads to some odd problems between mounting some accessories on the rods below the camera, as well as a thing called lens spin that we'll talk about later on in the video. So the cage we ended up going with actually isn't one of the custom expensive models that you'll see all over the Blackmagic forums. Instead, we went with a simple, incredibly affordable cage that actually ends up having 2 contact points on the camera and allows you to mount quite a lot of gear. So essentially, this cage is a universal camera cage from Camvate. Basically, the way the camera mounts is it mounts to the bottom with a 1/4-20. You can actually use 2 1/4-20s on the bottom to go into both of the mounting holes. And then on the top, it mounts using an adjustable Coldshoe mount. Now, that's not exactly what the 6K Pro has. To do this, I actually ended up using a 1/4-20 to a Coldshoe mount adapter from Smallrig. But if you want to avoid this, you can actually just buy another bottom plate for the top and just replace the top plate with it. And then you have 1/4-20s on both sides that you can screw in, and it'd be super solid. Now, securing the sides is a metal rod that I've actually found is the exact same dimensions as a 15mm rod. So if you really did want to go taller on this camera, you could theoretically just buy a 15mm aluminum rod and put it in place. That would work just fine. But for me, the stock one that came with it worked perfectly fine. So that's what I ended up going with. On the top of the cage, I ended up mounting a Nato rail from Smallrig, which allowed me to attach my handle, which also connects with a Nato rail. Now on top of the handle, I put a Kong quick release hook. This can work with the Kong quick release for the Easyrig so that I could remove the camera from the Easyrig very easily. Now, quick tip, if you're using an Easyrig, the Kong quick release is a huge help on set. It gets the camera on and off so easily, and you can throw it on a tripod or put it wherever you need very quickly. So if time is of the essence, that is a very good accessory to have. Okay, so now that we've got the top part of the camera done, let's go ahead and talk about the bottom part of the camera. Now, the main issue and the top priority I had while rigging up the 6K Pro was actually getting my Mattebox to completely fit correctly. So I used the Tilta MBT12 Mattebox, which is a Mattebox that can be mounted by the rails or as a clamp-on. However, what I found is that because the camera uses an EF mount, there's actually a good deal of play in the lens mount itself. So if you have a follow focus hooked up, especially a torquey motor follow focus, it ends up spinning the lens slightly back and forth. Now, this ends up causing some jitter in the image, which is really something you want to avoid. Now, you can actually use a lens support. I think Smallrig makes one, Zacuto also used to make one. However, the newly introduced distance between the lens mount and the bottom of the camera actually caused the lens support to not even reach anymore. And with the other solution, using the Mattebox both clamped on to the lens as well as to the rods, It ends up providing a good amount of support, so I don't even need the lens support. The problem was the Mattebox didn't fit either. So that's why I kind of had to make this system. So now that that's a known issue, let's talk about how I solved it. On the bigger cinema cameras, what we use is something called a VCT plate. Well, sometimes we'll use that. And basically a VCT plate is a shoulder mount that also mounts onto a tripod head with a special plate adapter. And it has a rod mount on it that shifts up and down so that you can adjust the height of the rods themselves. So if I could find a VCT plate that was smaller and had adjustable rods, or just a system that had adjustable rods, that'd be awesome. But as of right now, I couldn't find any. So if you know of any, let me know down below. Now, what I ended up using for the rods was the Smallrig camera base plate, and I wasn't able to use a quick release plate because I just needed it to be very compact and the rails close to the lens itself. This actually worked pretty well with the cage because it provided just enough distance up so that the lens wasn't too close to the rods. So now the Mattebox can mount onto both the lens and the rods at the same time without being too close. Now, quick tip on the rods. What I ended up using was 8-inch carbon fiber rods, but if I were to do it again, I would actually go with aluminum. And the reason is because carbon fiber rods actually have a good deal of flex in them. They might not as you go in the really high-end rods, but at least in the low end, the carbon fiber rods definitely flex a bit more than I'd like. And when you attach a follow focus that has a good amount of torque, it ends up actually slowly pushing away from the motor, or if you have a really high torque move that you need to do fast, it'll start to grind the teeth, which doesn't really hurt anything, but if you're in the middle of a critical move on the camera, it'll kind of ruin it, and you'll have to recalibrate the follow focus, which another thing you can do to save money here is to buy 9, 10, or 12-inch aluminum rods. This will save you money because on the back we have the battery plate mounted. Now, the way I ended up mounting the battery on the back of the camera was I used the Smallrig rail block rod clamp, which I ended up screwing on with 2 longer 1/4-20 screws to the back of the base, and that allows me to adjust the front rails without really needing to worry about the battery itself. But realistically, if you're trying to go simpler and a little bit more budget friendly, you can just get the longer rails and then just attach the battery on the back, and that works just as well. I also ended up using some super tiny rods in the back as kind of little nubs to mount the battery to, so I didn't have any rods to worry about. But again, this is really an optional thing, and only really do it if you have the extra pieces available to you. And finally, as we already talked about, I used the Tilta MBT12 matte box, which is actually a really nice clamp-on style matte box that has rail mounts as well. So it's a very versatile solution. It is a little bit big, but honestly, I'm kind of used to larger cinema cameras anyway, so that doesn't really bother me. And it uses a nice top French flag that can also temporarily double as a lens cover if you're taking the camera out of the staging area and bringing it into the set. So again, just to reiterate, the reason I ended up going with a clamp-on and a rail mount on the lens is so that I minimize the jitter of the EF mount going back and forth. It's a really good solution all around for me. It doesn't really take too much time to change the lens, and it's just a really solid piece of equipment. So that's my 6K Pro build for now. I do plan on getting a custom cage in the future. Maybe I'll check out the offerings from Tilta, perhaps the offerings from Smallrig, but for the shoots I have coming up imminently, this is going to be the setup I'm going to be rocking. If you're interested in any of the products I talked about today, there are actually a lot of links in the description. They are affiliate links, which means I do get a small kickback for every purchase that's made. However, the product price stays the exact same for you. If you don't want to do that, no worries, just search the product names on your preferred store. So let me know if you're thinking about rigging up your 6K Pro, or how you've rigged up other cameras in the past. Perhaps there's some interesting alternatives that I haven't seen. I'm personally going to be pretty interested in the Tilta one, as I've already said, but we'll definitely see what comes onto the market, and if something really enticing comes on, I'm sure it'll be on this channel at some point. So anyways, if you have time and enjoyed the video, a like is always appreciated. Subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, I hope you learned something. You did. Bye guys.